in Japan, the term for a man who doesn't have a girlfriend or won't ever have a girlfriend is a herb man, as in right? So he just exists on vegetables. He's not really a real man. So we have all of these very, very unconscious, I think, but palpable associations and infused meaning in what, when, and why we choose to eat.
It's one of the things that our brains need most in the whole world. Food. What you eat will affect how you grow, what you think, and it turns out even your chances of going to prison. And the food we eat, what it is and where it comes from, is one of the biggest things to worry about when it comes to doing something, or not, about climate change. But all of that being as it may, none of us deal particularly well with being told we should eat differently. Why? What is our psychology around food? And what might it tell us about what to do about the climate crisis? I'm Dave, and I've been campaigning and talking about climate change for the best part of 2 decades, and there is so much I don't know about one of the most important causes of it all, human brains and how they work. Your Brain on Climate is a podcast about psychology and what it can teach us about climate change, how we got it, and what we might do about it. Joining me this week is Kimberley Wilson. Kimberley is a chartered psychologist, author and lecturer in food. She writes and talks about food and lifestyle and the role that they play in our mental health, including in things like how our society works. And yeah, she was once a finalist in the Great British Bake Off, but we don't talk about that. Instead, what we talk about is food and development and violence, food and mental health, including for saving the planet, and how we need to understand people's real relationship to food if we're really serious about getting them to eat something else. Now, as anyone who's listened to the pilot will know, we don't want you to worry if you hear something mentioned in passing, which is a link to something you might want to go away and read about later. You'll just hear this noise. I've replaced the twinkly noise I used in the pilot with a nice soothing owl noise to denote wisdom. And when you hear this noise, it means there's something in the show notes that explains and expands upon the thing you've just heard. So you don't have to worry about it for now. Carry on listening. So to start with, I asked Kimberley, well, I made an admission about my own awful eating habits. I asked her whether or not I was the problem.
Your brain on climate.
I want to talk about food, first of all, and I want to talk about a frequent disagreement that I have with my lovely partner. She's an amazing cook. I can follow a recipe and I put some effort in, but most of the time, with food, I can't really be bothered. I can't be bothered to sit and kind of think about what to eat. I often be found sitting on the floor eating a bowl of pasta with nothing on it. And sometimes I get told off for not caring enough about my own nutrition. Do you think that's right?
Well, in a very kind of therapeutic stance, do you think that's right, Dave?
I think it's probably not right. I think just eating raw pasta, not raw pasta, I do cook it, not a dog, I think is not right. I think I'm not getting all my nutrients.
I think, so food has a lot of different effects on different people. And I think one of the things I certainly do come across is this idea that it is very complicated and it's very overwhelming. And I think there are a group of people who get overwhelmed by the choice and the decisions and the rules and the expectations, and that sits within their concept of what food and eating are. And that's when you find yourself sitting, rocking in the corner, just eating cereal out of the box because it's just too much to think about. Whereas I think there are another group of people who look at food perhaps more playfully, what can I, as a creative outlet maybe, what can I make? What is it? What can I do with this? Where's the adventure in this material? And let's see what happens. And so I would suggest that probably you're more group A. And And somewhere along the
probably right.
line, you got this kind of very strong message about what food should be. I think often there's something about what a meal should be and what its constituent parts should be. And I think if you can just free yourself from those rules, if you can just unpick those little tangled threads of what a meal should look like and what you should have to do and what nutrients should be on the plate and how it should be presented, then you'll free yourself up from maybe some of that overwhelm, and you can just be a bit more playful with it and just start with, well, what do I fancy? Maybe if I just fancy a potato, how can I make this potato tasty?
So you have done a lot about food and psychology, right?
Mm-hmm.
The psychology of food. And how did you get in a nutshell? How did you get into that, and what is that link as you see it?
I think there are many links, and I think that I'm sure there are lots of different ways that I've come to it. The clearest in my mind, the most conscious one, is when I was working in prison. And for several years, I was running a therapy service in what was then Europe's largest women's prison.
Wow.
H&P Holloway, which is now closed.
Is it?
Yeah. It closed a few years ago. I won't go down. That's a big segue. Like, it was a terrible idea.
Shouldn't have been closed.
No, it shouldn't have been closed.
Yeah.
Anyway. But at the time, one of the big issues about women's prisons in particular, prisons in general, but women's prisons in particular, is that the rates of self-harm. Women self-harm at a rate which is extraordinarily high and much higher than men. You know, women made up something like 5 or 6% of the overall prison population, but at the time were responsible for something like nearly 50% of the acts of self-harm, at least as it was recorded. And so I would have to sit in these meetings with the security department and safety and safety and custody services, thinking about how we keep these women safe. And around that time, a replication study came out. So there had been a study published in the UK in 2002, and then I was in prisons from around 2007, 2008. And around 2009-10, I think, a big replication study came out from the Netherlands, the Ministry of Justice in the Netherlands, showing, again, that if you improve nutrition in prisons through supplementation in this case, it wasn't improving their overall diets, which is tricky, but by giving supplements compared to placebo, so one group was getting a placebo and didn't know that they weren't getting an active nutrient, but you were able to reduce incidents, so objective incidents of violence. You look in the book and see how many incidents of violence had been on the wing that day. You're able to reduce objective incidents of violence by 30%. 30%.
Wow.
And in the original study in 2002, that had been about kind of 33%, I think. In the Netherlands study, actually the gap was bigger than that because the placebo group got worse. So the actual difference between the active arm of the trial and the placebo group was somewhere closer to 45%. Wow. And so here I am in prison trying to keep women safe, trying to stop them from hurting themselves and or each other, and thinking, well, this is extraordinary. Here's this very cheap, it costs pennies a day to supplement. We have an accessible route to provide the supplements because we have nurses providing medication to everyone in prisons. Prisons are incredibly highly medicated organisations and environments. Many people are sedated, and many people are coming off drugs and withdrawals. Lots of people are on psychotropic medications for their psychiatric disorders and illnesses. So we have means of distribution. So it's cheap, it's accessible, and there are low risks. Why aren't we doing this? And so I tried to get conversations with governors to see, whether could we do a small trial? Could we try this? And it basically got nowhere. Right. But that, I think, at least consciously, was the point where I thought, well, this is extraordinary. We know now, and placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized trials are the gold standard for causality in clinical studies. We know now, we've got 2 trials, and now there's been another one in Singapore published last year. We know that if you improve nutrition, people feel better and they're less violent. That sounds like something we should be trying.
That's so crazy, isn't it? Because you kind of think that nutrition is a thing that over on the long term is good for you. Mm-hmm. But kind of what you're describing is kind of overnight.
Pretty acutely. So we were looking at 8 to 12 weeks. Wow. Seeing these really profound effects. And, there are anger management courses up the Casbah in this population. Like, you can't move for people trying to give you courses on how to think more clearly, the ABC, your antecedents, your behaviour, the consequences, trying to get you to think more rationally about the things that you've done. But you cannot think rationally on a brain that fundamentally doesn't have the constituents it needs to work properly. And this is where we come in, that people talk a lot about, what should I eat for my serotonin, or how can I boost my serotonin, or how can I, improve my melatonin to sleep better? But let's start with your serotonin is made of nutrients. It doesn't just emerge out of your brain from nowhere. Serotonin, that big neurotransmitter of feeling good, is made of iron. It's made of tryptophan. You need B vitamins and vitamin C in order to actually produce it. So if you do not have those constituent parts in sufficient amounts, you simply will not have a brain that's working properly. And so that's when I kind of set forth on my soapbox to get more people thinking about this.
It's just, I don't know why I find this so mind-blowing. I think partially because I just sit on the floor eating pasta and don't really think about it. But you're saying something that's so obviously true, but there is something about just that sense that the actual stuff you put into you is the only stuff that gets in. And like that stuff is what literally makes up your brain and your mood. So this stuff does matter.
It really matters. It really, really matters. So much so that, there's a plethora of studies showing where should we start? Obviously, as I said, you are made of food. So in utero, of course, you're composed of what your mother is eating. And they're broken down into amino acids and fatty acids, and then they make you. And in particular, the omega-3 fatty acids make your brain. Your brain is composed of fats that are called essential because your body cannot make them and your mother's body cannot make them. You have to get them from the diet. So a pregnant woman who is not eating enough omega-3 fatty acids cannot supply the right building blocks for the baby's brain. So already a baby born to a mother who is deficient in DHA, one of these essential omega-3 fatty acids, is going to have a baby whose brain is more vulnerable. It doesn't have as many connections. It won't be as resistant to stress. It won't be able to develop as fully as a mother who was eating, enough oily fish or supplementing appropriately. And so it starts from there. And you see differences in those groups of children in terms of their academic ability, in terms of their externalizing behaviors, their likelihood of acting out, punching, biting, scratching, that sort of thing. And all of those things have a knock-on effect on how that child is perceived, right? So whether you've got a child who is able to sit down and focus and concentrate versus a child who is irritable, acting out, makes a difference to how they're perceived by their teachers, by their peer group, and so forth. So these are really important knock-on effects that start in utero, but obviously early life and childhood nutrition is a big part on how the brain develops, and therefore how your behaviour, your behavioural trajectory goes forward as well.
Because that study, the studies you were talking about and the work you were doing in prison, one way I guess that could be interpreted is when people are in a situation, what they eat can make them more or less likely to be stroppy and have fights. But it sounds like or something. It sounds like what you're saying also, but I don't know, this feels like this isn't what you're saying because it's too simplistic, but there's a large element of if you eat properly and you have the right nutrients, you might be a lot less likely to go to prison in the first place.
That is exactly what I'm saying, Dave.
Hey!
So the same effects hold for children and adolescents as well, and even more so, right? Because your brain is still developing until you're 25, right? So you're basically still an adolescent until your mid-20s. And there's a lot of what's called kind of pruning going on. So connections that aren't really needed are being shaved back in order to help shape a brain that is best fitted for that environment, because that's what your brain does. It fits you for your particular environment that you find yourself in, which is why we have such diverse ways of thinking and ways of being and existing in very diverse environments across the planet, right? It allows us to adapt. So you have this extraordinary period of pruning and plasticity and your brain reshaping. But at the same time, for adolescence, you have this influx of hormones, which is just going to mess you up. It makes it all a bit of a mess. But it means that nutrition is incredibly important during this period, making sure that this rapidly developing brain is getting what it needs. But we know, for example, that children who are hungry explain more externalizing behaviors. And one of the reasons is that when you're hungry, when your blood sugar drops, you get a rise in cortisol, because cortisol helps to release energy into your bloodstream. But it also makes you agitated, right? And that's why we talk about hunger. If an adult gets hungry, then think about a child who is hungry, but doesn't have the skills to be able to, manage their behavior or understand that the way they're acting, their irritability, their agitation is because they're hungry and not because they hate the person they're sitting next to or they're angry with the teacher. And so we have this we all have a group of children who simply for the fact that they aren't getting enough to eat will be exhibiting behaviors that we call naughty or bad, and will therefore be labeled with that. But also, alongside that because their brains aren't getting the nutrients needed to grow and to function well, will have difficulties with attention, will have difficulties sustaining attention for the half hour that a lesson is. It takes a lot of energy. Your brain is the hungriest organ in the body. It will take a lot of energy to sit down and concentrate on difficult tasks, difficult sums. And if you are depleted to start with, then you will struggle academically. Children who eat breakfast do better academically. Children who, even when you control for other indices of deprivation, children on free school meals are 4 times more likely to be kicked out of school. And that hunger, the behavioural antecedents or consequences of hunger, is part of the behaviour that gets them kicked out of school. And I think that is an absolute scandal.
So I have been working for years and years and years and years and years on climate changey sort of stuff. Not just exclusively climate changey sort of stuff, like other green hippie things, right? And I've worked in offices, which obviously I haven't done for kind of 18 months now. I've worked in offices. And one thing I would say is not entirely true, but quite consistently true, is that people don't eat lunch properly. They will either A, I definitely include myself in this, right? They will either A, sit at their desk because there's too much to do and everything is busy and the planet is burning and they haven't got time, and they'll just sort of shove some bread in their face or something and barely chew it and it goes down. Or they'll go to a greasy spoon and they'll have a plate of chips or beans or something like that. And so there's that. And then the other thing I noticed is there's an awful lot of people working on climate changey stuff that are all strung out and depressed and burned out, kind of. And I wonder if one of the first things we need to be doing then, if what we're trying to do is save the planet, is have a proper lunch. What do you reckon?
Lunch will save everything. Well, I think, I come across, because I work with issues with food and digestion and IBS, I see a fair amount of this. And I think one of the things that it's important to know is that your body is very sensitive to what we call valence. It's pleasantness versus unpleasantness. But also that eating requires a different kind of neurological environment to work. So we think about the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system. So your sympathetic nervous system being fight, flight, activity, movement, action, getting stuff done. And your parasympathetic nervous system being what literally we call it the rest and digest system. Let's settle down. Let's stop for a moment. Let's just allow our food to digest. And so those are different. It's like a seesaw. One is on and one is off. You cannot be stressed and active and moving and eating and digesting properly at the same time. It will not work, because what happens when you're stressed is that your blood your bloodstream is divested. It's moved away from the gut into your limbs so that you can get on, or into your brain so that you can get on and do the thing that you're doing. And so your digestion will slow when you're stressed or when you're working very hard, when you're concentrating and focusing. And so trying to eat whilst checking emails or on the phone or, you know, in the middle of a busy meeting
on bloody Twitter.
Or or read, like, doom scrolling on Twitter is a terrible idea in terms of digestion. And it kind of gives your body this kind of mixed signal, which is we're kind of stressed and worried and anxious, but we're trying to be in this other state to allow digestion to happen. You will not be able to digest your food properly. Your digestion will be slowed. It will be slightly erratic. There won't, you know, it won't be comfortable.
It's crazy.
And so stopping for that half hour and just taking yourself away, being away from a screen or going for a walk, I tell people, I want you to just take 3 long controlled breaths before you start eating, just to give your body the signal that it's time to move into digestion mode now.
So eat the right stuff and then actually give yourself time to eat it. And it's not a small thing, right? Like, this, what you eat will affect your brain power, which and how you eat will affect your mood in ways that really matter. Like, if you're trying to save the planet or indeed do anything decent, like, we need you at your sharpest, right? And if that means, I don't know, you maybe have a longer lunch break and you don't do one other task you're going to do, on balance, that's better.
Yeah. I think you'll end up, most of the studies show that you'll end up being more productive when you give yourself adequate rest, because then you're not running on fumes. So your body has a chance to recover and come back. But also, we need, in order to answer the big questions that we're all facing at the moment, whether it's kind of international migration or climate change, we need good brains, right? We need well-fed, well-rested, well-developed brains in order to do that work. And one of the big concerns for a lot of the researchers is that because of our diets, because of the way that we're eating, something called the Flynn effect is reversing. So the Flynn effect is the way that global IQs have been increasing basically since records began, because of improvements in education, healthcare and nutrition. But since the 70s, the Flynn effect has been reversing.
So we're actually getting stupider. We are eating ourselves stupid, is what you're about to say.
I might use that as a title for my next book. Wow. And that's a worry, isn't it? Right? Because actually, these
because
are complex
we're stupid enough
issues.
As it is.
Exactly. Really complex issues need attention, focus, complexity and systemic thinking. You need good brains to do that. And so that's a worry.
Your brain on climate.
All of this is making me think something kind of bigger about, like, food and climate change and stuff like that, right? And it's one of the things that I understand, if we're going to make a difference to what we do about climate change, is what we eat, right? Like, meat and dairy is responsible for some colossal amount, I forget what it is now, 30% or something of the world's emissions, huge amount of land use, all that sort of stuff. And it is generally accepted that, like, one of the things the world is going to have to do is eat less meat and dairy. Right. And this is, and let's not talk about kind of how that is to happen, but that's a generally accepted thing. But I've been a militant vegan for 15 years now. I'm going to talk in a minute about you probably telling me why that's a bad idea. But that has meant that I have got to experience firsthand kind of how, I want to say weird, but certainly intensely personal and cultural people's relationship with the food they eat is, right? And so, like, when you do something that is relatively normal in the scheme of things, like, eating less meat and dairy, for some people, that is like you have actively slapped them in the face. Yeah. Right? Oh, yeah. What? So my big thought is, how are we going to get people to eat less meat and dairy? But I guess, like, firstly, that's about understanding people's relationship to food, right? Where does that come from? People's kind of really strongly held opinions and that stuff.
So it comes from the kind of confluence of a few different things. One is the human brain's in some ways, really beautiful capacity to imbue other things with meaning, right? So that, I don't know, well, like a cross. So we can imbue a wooden cross with huge symbolic meaning in terms of religion. You know, it represents faith, it represents God, it represents a belief in the supernatural, you know, all of this. So much so that it's sacred and you cannot touch it. The same with flags, right? It's a piece of coloured material, but if you burn one or if you, you know, and that's our capacity to imbue otherwise inanimate objects with deep meaning. And food, we do this with food, but also food isn't quite an inanimate object in the same way, right? Because as you say, food is what we put inside of us. And so food becomes part of the way in which that boundary between the external world and the internal world is slightly blurred. But also food becomes a marker of identity, you know, so that the way that if let's say in my family, when we make tea, we always put the milk in first, right?
Oh, good Lord, yeah. Cream on top of the jam or jam on top of the cream, right?
And so what that means for me is that a cup of tea isn't just a cup of tea. It's my family tradition. It's my feelings about my parents. It's my pride in where I come from. It becomes really suffuse with all of that stuff. And so if I make you a cup of tea and you look at me weirdly and go, what? Where have you put the milk in first? What's that about? Then it's not just that you're insulting the way I've made this cup of tea. You're insulting something that's deeply held about what it means to me and what it represents to me and about me in the world. So there's that. So there's that kind of the way we suffuse things with meaning. There's the associated personal and cultural traditions of food. But there is also this way in which food is a social marker, certainly for us. Well, I can only really speak from a Western perspective, but it is a marker of class. Where you shop is a marker of class. Do you go to Waitrose or do you go to Aldi? You know, and what does that say? It is a marker of education. You know, what you eat tells me about what you know, how much you know about nutrition, how much you know about what is good for you and all of that sort of stuff. But it also, in ways that I don't think people really understand, tells me something more about your beliefs. And that can be about masculinity or femininity. So the way that meat is associated really deeply in our psychology with masculinity. So much so that, you know, well, I mean, insults on internet forums for men and you know, when we talk about alpha and beta men, it's always associated with whether they eat meat or not. Yeah. In Japan, the term for a man who doesn't have a girlfriend or won't ever have a girlfriend is a herb man, as in like right? So he just exists on vegetables. He's not really a real man. So we have all of these very, very unconscious, I think, but palpable associations and infused meaning in what, when and why we choose to eat.
Yeah, I remember a woman telling me that on Tinder, like so many men will have pictures of them sitting down eating a massive steak, you know, and also like it's cultural ritual as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Like this really deeply held sense of normal and what normal is.
Yeah.
And people take it so kind of personally. So what is your, like, when you have, I don't know if you have, but what successes or otherwise have you had in getting people to sort of think less weirdly and attackily about kind of the food that we eat and getting people maybe to step back from some of that stuff?
Well, I think it's always, it's about kind of presenting that kind of information. Everything you know about food is really a concept, right? And our concepts are inherited. So the things that I think are food will have been given to me by my family, my culture, my environment, the country I grew up in. And so if I go somewhere else, I'm suddenly challenged by a different conceptualization of food, like eating grasshoppers, for example. Not something that we do in England, but
That's
in
not
other
cricket.
parts of the, right? Exactly. But in other parts of the world, a completely normal, everyday and valuable source of protein. And the only difference is the concept of what is a food and what isn't a food.
Right. See, horse meats, right? There's a good example. I remember when everyone was losing their rag about horse meats accidentally ending up in beef burgers, was it, a few years ago in the
Lasagnas,
UK?
I think.
Lasagnas. Think on that, won't you? Think on that. And everyone over here losing, going mental about it and thinking, well, it's just, well, who decides? If you're a cow, you're a bit annoyed at that, aren't you? Like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why? What?
Hang on. Hey! Hey! So let me ask you about this vegan thing. Now, you are not my personal nutritional counsellor, but the reason this is relevant to the podcast, right? Because there are an increasing number of vegans who are doing it for environmental reasons and or people who are not fully vegan but will be going vegetarian or trying to be vegan sometimes and stuff like that. And like just from what we know about the nutrition and all the stuff we talked about mood and development, is it all right to be a vegan? Like, and because this matters, right? Like, you don't want everyone to kind of go and do a thing without thinking about it, which is making them burned out and is making society worse.
Yeah. So my answer is yes, but. And
not looking forward to this.
The but is the acknowledgement that meat and animal foods aren't just protein sources. So, the big argument that people, I think, when people argue about veganism or reducing meat is, you can get protein from other sources, and you absolutely can. But those aren't the only nutrients that you find in animal foods. And so it's worth, if you're reducing or eliminating animal foods from your diet, knowing which nutrients, and from my perspective, particularly brain supporting nutrients, are found in animal foods that you will need to supplement. And so the big three for me are omega-3 fatty acids, so DHA and EPA, because as I say, they are essential, which means they can only be found in animal foods, in the diet, and in particular for marine foods, so oily fish and seafood. That the forms that you need to be careful when you look at the labels on supplements, because it will say high in omega-3, but often it's a plant or seed derived omega-3 in the form of ALA, which really isn't the form that will support the brain. And the body cannot really, it can a little bit, but can't really convert it into the form that it needs. So you need to be looking for an algae-based DHA supplement and getting a combined DHA and EPA of around 500 milligrams per day. And again, looking at the back of that packet, because it might say 500 milligrams per serving, but a serving is 6 tablets. And so if you're taking one a day, it won't be enough.
Right. Wow. Okay.
So omega-3 fatty acids, choline. So choline is another essential nutrient.
I've never heard of it. How have I got to be 43 and not heard of that?
Friend. And so choline, literally, there is a neurotransmitter in your brain called acetylcholine, and it's made from choline, which is found most abundantly in egg yolks. So again, even people in LA, when people going through the egg white phase and leaving the egg yolks out of their omelettes, you're missing out on these essential nutrients for brain function. And again, choline, there's some in, I think, almonds and in wheat germ, but you need to be checking the amounts that you're eating, and I would be recommending supplementation if you are fully vegan, fully plant-based. And then the big one, well, they're all big ones, they kind of sit in all three of them sit at the top of the podium really, is B12. So most vegans will know about B12. B12 is so crucial. I mean, all the B vitamins really, and they work in synergy, kind of feeding back on each other. But B12 in particular is so important for brain health that a deficiency in B12 can end up mimicking dementia. It can lead to real problems in terms of mood and memory function. And the thing is that, and also for energy release. And the thing is that because it's needed in such small amounts, that deficiency takes a while to kick in. So someone can be, and often people feel absolutely great when they switch to a much more plant-heavy diet. And that's often just because they're eating more plants, I think. And they feel much better and they feel like they've got much more energy and they're eating more fibre, and all of this is fantastic. But it won't be for 2 or 3 years, actually, that those deficiencies in B12 will kick in if they're not supplementing. And they start to feel a kind of fatigue, a bit of lethargy, maybe a bit brain foggy, just not feeling quite as sharp as they might otherwise. And because it's such a big lag between the point at which they cut out animal foods, they won't normally associate it with something that they're not eating. And so they'll be thinking, oh, well, maybe it's something I am eating. Should I restrict something else? Or should I try something different? Should I, and that's when you can get into a real mess. And people can start to get a bit overly restricting, because we have this idea that if you're feeling bad, the answer is to cut something out.
Yeah.
Rather than put something else back in. And so those would be the ones I would really think about for people who aren't eating animal foods.
So take it seriously, and don't take it just as like, this is not a vegan propaganda podcast. Listen to Kimberley. Be responsible, but it can be done. We can eat less meat and dairy, but we've got to do it carefully.
Yes, just be thoughtful about it.
Fantastic. Kimberley, thank you so much for coming on Your Brain on Climate. You have a new book. Would you like to alert everyone to the new book?
Yes, well, not that new. It came out at the beginning of lockdown, so I guess it did feel like the world stood still at the point that my book was launched. But yes, it's called How to Build a Healthy Brain. And really, I like to think of it as an encyclopedia or a Bible for brain health. So I give you a little introduction into how your brain works, and then help you with the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise, the way that dental health affects your brain health, the way that having a hot bath can reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease, all of that sort of stuff. Little everyday, cheap or free things that you can do to help protect your brain for the long term.
So that was my chat with Kimberley, and a few things it left me thinking about. Firstly, eat a proper lunch. Like, I'm serious about that. Ever since I did that chat a few weeks ago now, I've been thinking really hard about the food I eat, and not only what I eat, but kind of how I eat it, trying to chew properly and not wolf stuff down. But on a more kind of profound level, I guess, it got me thinking about this massive problem of meat and dairy, and we know, all the modelling will show that you want to do something about climate change, you've got to do something about the amount of meat and dairy that is eaten, right? And sometimes that's just said as a thing. We need to eat less meat and dairy, as if that was the easiest thing in the world, as if people's relationship to food was the same as their relationship to their electricity. But it isn't. At a cultural, societal level, we carry around all of these deep kind of associations with meat and dairy and health and food and the role it plays in culture and what normal is. And at a personal level, we do that too. And we have our own associations and hang-ups and neuroses and memories of food and what it means to us. So you need different sorts of conversations, I reckon, when talking about food, to understand that it's this incredibly personal, intimate thing. And like I said to Kimberley, I found out firsthand that people can go so funny about my own dietary choices. When I say to them I'm a vegan, they'll go so funny about that. It triggers people at a kind of deep level. So that was Your Brain on Climate, episode 1 of season 1. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. I'd love to know what you thought. You can drop me an email to hello@yourbrainonclimate.com or on Twitter @brainclimate. I may do other social things if there's demand for them, but it's enough to keep up with those, to be quite honest. Please, please, please leave a review for the show on your podcast medium of choice. Write some words with your hands and put a star review, ideally 5 stars if you possibly can. At this early stage in particular of the show, it makes a massive difference to get it noticed and get it up the charts. The logo for the show is done by the wonderful Arthur Stovall, who you can find at Designed by Mondial. And all the music in the show is done by me. So I hope you like it. That's it. That's all I've got for this week. I'll be back soon. Look after yourself, hit subscribe, and I'll see you as soon as I possibly can. Okay, bye.